Hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of my Fourth Closet video. In my last video, we talked about the critiques and problems that I had with the Fourth Closet and why I think that it overall is not a great book and my main frustrations with it. Ultimately, what annoyed me so much about the book was the masses of wasted potential. There was just so much that could have been done that wasn't. So, how can we fix these issues? Well, capitalizing on the aforementioned wasted potential and in the process grounding out the issues of the original. Like I said, if done right, a lot of the inconsistencies and plot holes would either become a lot less glowing or just stop being issues altogether. But first, since I really ripped into the book last episode, before we go ahead and try to fix it, I just want to cover some things that I actually did like about it. Jessica is the baddest bitch on the block and she was delight in every scene she was in. Carlton was as enjoyable as ever and had a very heartwarming arc. The Spirit World scene was very nice and was a satisfying end to the missing children incident arc. Elizabeth is an incredibly strong character and a very compelling antagonist. She's one of the major redeeming qualities of this book and I absolutely adore her. The pizzeria scenes with Mangle and Funtime Freddy were a lot of fun. They're a total filler, but they're very fun and a nice distraction from the whole baby conflict. Okay, and with that out of the way, let's go ahead and fix this thing. Alright, let me explain how I'm going to structure this. I'm going to start off by listing off my ideas, and then at the end I'm going to take them all and turn them into a cohesive narrative. Got it? Got it. Alright, before we start getting into majorly altering the narrative itself, we have to start by making a few fundamental changes. First of all, let's change the protagonist. I'm sorry, but John is such a frustrating but also simultaneously bland character, especially when we have to see all of his whiny, idiotic thoughts. If we change the protagonist, the first act of the book will be so much easier to read. So we have a few options as far as replacements go. First of all, we can make it Baby herself. While this is an interesting idea, I do think it would be kind of hard to write around without revealing too much, and with that we wouldn't be able to have John and Jessica uncover the mystery alongside the reader, without doing that obnoxious perspective jumping thing I complained about last time. We could also make it Clay, which is again an interesting idea since he's been haunted by the events of Freddy's whole life, and to see something like Circus Babies crop up could provide a uniquely sad insight. But Clay's out of commission for a large part of the story, so again, not really a strong option. Carlton and Marla don't do much until the third act, and even then it's just pizzeria stuff, not anything really having to do with the baby conflict. So that leaves us as one last option, Jessica. In my opinion, Jessica is the best fit. First of all, she's there with John for a large part of the action in the first half, so that won't require too many rewrites. Secondly, if Jessica is the protagonist, the illusion disc nonsense will be less of an issue since she does believe that baby is Charlie. Also, since Jessica was Charlie's roommate for 6 months, it would make more sense for us to see the mystery unravel from her point of view. It'd be a lot more interesting to see her react to this than John, who was always suspicious of her. By making Jessica the protagonist, we can also get rid of that horrible date scene and a lot of other scenes where John treats Baby in a really objectionable way. Speaking of which, let's also change something else regarding John. I don't think John should be suspicious of Baby from the beginning. Would it not make more sense for him to be in denial? Perhaps deep down he knows that she couldn't have survived, but he thinks it's her. The baby reveal should be a moment of betrayal for the characters, not a time for John to be like, I told you so. Maybe we can even have John living with Baby or something, which would make the reveal extra devastating for him. So we've already cleared up a lot of the issues with the characters right away, but now you have the issue of making up for lost time. So let's have some scenes of Jessica seeing things that incriminate Baby as not being Charlie, which can launch them into her investigating them more closely. We could add a part where Jessica sees Baby going behind Circus Babies, which could then have Jessica already know where to go during the whole kidnapping surgery part, making her actions a little more logical here. We can also add a scene where Jessica talks to John about her findings, and John insists that it's her and she's being paranoid. At this point, Jessica should have some piece of evidence that basically confirms Charlie is an imposter, but John doesn't want to believe it, which will be frustrating but more sympathetic than his original whining. This would effectively replace the date scene. As for the smoking gun evidence, let's make some fun use of the illusion discs here. In this scene, John and Jessica will describe her to each other and realize that something isn't quite right. Maybe John could see her with short hair, or Jessica could see her with freckles, but since that's how they've always perceived her, they haven't ever questioned it. I find this to be so much more interesting than just finding out through pictures. It actually makes use of illusion discs as a concept. So after we would have that, John would walk away starting to seriously consider Jessica's proposition. Meanwhile, Jessica would go to Clay's house to get him to corroborate this, but when she gets there, she finds the door torn to shreds and him wounded on the floor. This would make them appear less stupid since they didn't even see Baby and they couldn't have known Clay would have been attacked by her. This is also a good time to mention that I want to make Ella the one to say Shining Star Silver Reef, not Theodore. We could keep the Charlie mumbling it thing from the graphic novel, but it'd make a little more sense here since Ella and Charlie are directly connected to each other. They are the same person after all. It still isn't perfect, but it makes more sense than Theodore at least. Ella could still be in Clay's possession, but Jessica could take her in this scene now. While she's waiting for the ambulance to arrive, she could find her saying Shining Star Silver Reef. This would no longer necessitate John going back to retrieve her later on, since that scene didn't do much to progress the plot anyway. At the hospital, the story would progress like normal, minus the whole photo thing with Clay, and also with Jessica and John's places swapped, of course. Jessica would tell him about the deal with Ella, and they would go to Aunt Jen's to ask her some questions. However, there are a couple changes I want to make here. First of all, I want more time with Aunt Jen actually there. We don't need a whole analysis, but I just want some time to feel something when she dies. Maybe we could just have her accompany John and Jessica exploring the back room. She could provide some vague monologuing about how Charlie's death is also Henry's death for her. Probably something about the illusions that he created for himself and how he was living in a fantasy world, which could be a clumsy allegory for John's own relationship with Charlie. Then she could turn to her own inner turmoil following everything that happened, and how it caused her to become cold and distant until she realized she herself was dead inside after the deaths of her brother and niece. This would give Aunt Jen some more dimension and make her death feel a little more impactful. While we're here, let's also include the characters discovering Henry's suicide note and schematics for Ella. Aunt Jen can go back to the door and the story will progress like before. Baby will kill Aunt Jen, and John and Jessica will escape with Charlie, returning to John's apartment. After getting back, the story would continue to progress as normal, except without the Ella and library nonsense, since they're already accounted for. Baby then shows up, and rather than having her poke around at the apartment, let's instead have Jessica offer to go on a walk with her. This is smarter for the character, since it gets Baby out of the picture entirely. Jessica can still ask Baby silly questions to stall her, and then let's have her propose they all hang out together, as opposed to just going on a date with John. It should also be noted that at this point Baby's human appearance should fade nearly entirely. Perhaps she can appear as just looking like Baby, or she could look like this version of Charlie 4 we see in Elizabeth's backstory. So our characters will go out together, and the narrative will continue to progress relatively normally. Baby can bring up them going to Silver Reef like in the original, and then let's have Jessica spar with her a little. When Baby asks what they were doing in Silver Reef, Jessica can retaliate by asking her what she was doing at Circus Babies. It's not a massive improvement over the original, but I feel like having Baby actually be cleverly countered is better than just throwing empty threats at her. We could also include a cheesy line from John after this about how she tore his heart, and then she can point out that if he really cared about her, then he would have noticed sooner. At this point, John would become angry and try to attack Baby, but she would stop him before he could land any blows before getting up and leaving. This would make John more sympathetic and make it seem more like he actually does care about Charlie, because in the original he seemed to just hate Baby more than he actually loved Charlie at all. Of course, Baby would avoid it and then get up and leave like before. This would be followed by the same sequence as before with a few minor changes. First of all, Jessica should tell John exactly what her plan is, and she should follow Baby in her own car to the pizzeria. Instead of John having this stupid snarky line at the end, let's just have him agree to go back and keep an eye on Charlie. As in the original, Jessica will get kidnapped by Baby and held hostage in Circus Babies. Now that we're at the surgery scene, let's make some changes to William. First of all, I want to keep him in the Springtrap suit, because like I said before, there's no reason he can't or shouldn't be in it. Then let's make him much more deranged. He can still be a mad scientist, but in a much more cartoonish way. The William we see in the original book seems for the most part mentally sound, and I missed his more erratic and unhinged behavior we saw in the first two. He should take alarmingly visceral pleasure in kidnapping and killing. He should dance around spastically and maniacally cackle over his creations. He's certainly a genius, but an incredibly unstable one. Baby can be like the Harley Quinn to his Joker. The surgery scene I have no real problems with until the end, so it can pretty much go the same as before, except Baby will obviously draw the organs from through the suit. At the end of it, Jessica will let out an ear-splitting scream like in the original, but rather than just fainting, she'll run away as fast as she can. She'll run down the hall that Carlton is in at the end of the original story and just keep going, but eventually she'll get lost in the winding corridors and pass out from exhaustion. This will give a better reason for her to end up with the missing children. The implication here is that Mangle dragged her into the room with the kids because they're designed to keep any loose children in check. Okay, now we're coming up on the climax, where most of my problems become most heinous. First of all, let's set the entirety of the finale in Circus Babies. Aunt Jen's house isn't really relevant enough to warrant the grand reveal being here in my opinion. And if we have Charlie and Carlton's stories occurring alongside each other in the pizzeria, then the two-perspective thing would be a little more justifiable because we could have them converge. Then, let's just cut the earpieces entirely. Instead, let's have Baby destroy Charlie's old belongings. After all, she did use a lot of Henry's old work in her research. It makes sense for Elizabeth to have a vitriolic hatred for his creations. In fact, this isn't an assumption, we know she does. She says herself that she hates Charlie more than she loves William. With the earpieces out of the picture, let's just have the characters stealth their way through the restaurant, since by the end of the whole sequence they're effectively useless anyway. Alright, now we have to find a way for Charlie and John to be at the pizzeria. So we have a couple options here. We could have Baby kidnap Charlie successfully and that's how she ends up there. While I do like this idea, it doesn't give Charlie a lot of agency, which is one of my main issues with the book. The other option is to have Charlie go to the pizzeria of her own volition to help Jessica and co, and having John follow her, but that creates the issues of 1, how does she get there, and 2, that'd probably be very frustrating to read. However, I plan to have Charlie take action inside the pizzeria regardless, so let's just go with the kidnapping option because it seems more feasible. This can be followed by John following her to come rescue her. This also has John actually take action to protect Charlie and not just whine about it. Before that, though, let's have Carlton and Marla go on their rescue mission like originally, just no earpieces. Let's also get rid of those bitty bap things, since they don't do much that Mangle can't do. For the most part, this can go the same as it did before, except without the aforementioned aspects, of course. Let's keep the Mangle ball pit scene in, because I think it's fun and why not. More pizzeria hijinks never hurt anybody. Same for Carlton, that can go the same as originally for the most part. Alright, now let's get to the deal with Charlie. After getting kidnapped, let's have her end up in the same room Jessica was in when she was kidnapped. Then the whole sequence of Elizabeth revealing everything can go as it did originally, except let's have Charlie actually react emotionally this time. Just include her screaming in denial, crying, just something, and not just her being all, oh okay. After Elizabeth rips Ella out of Charlie, Charlie can crawl towards William's room and inside see him seemingly killing Carlton. This will be how the two perspectives converge. Alright, this is where I want to give Elizabeth some closure. One of my few problems with her in the original story was that she really didn't seem to care that much about William treating her like shit. Most of her actions were the robot being pissed, not her. So while she can't really get revenge on Henry, she can get revenge on William. He is indirectly responsible for her creation anyway. If he didn't kill Charlie, this whole mess never would have happened. So let's have Charlie and Elizabeth join forces so they can get revenge on William, the man who destroyed both of their lives, and finally end this once and for all. And how might they go about this? Well, by burning the whole place to the ground, of course. Yes, I want Charlie to mirror her father's role in the games and be the one to set it ablaze and end it all. Hopefully this would make up for Charlie's lack of presence in the first half of the book by making the time she does have in the story be very impactful. Elizabeth can throw William into the furnace, and in one final burst of vitality, he can jump out in the flaming spring suit before finally collapsing and causing the room to catch fire. This will allow for the big blaze to start. Meanwhile, the spirit world scene can go pretty much the same as before, except after Carlton makes the spirits realize Spring Bonnie's not their friend, then we can see the ghosts of a young Elizabeth and Charlie drag him away. While this is all going on, John's also running through the pizzeria, trying to find and rescue Charlie. As he gets closer to her, he'll find the pizzeria slowly being engulfed in flames, and when he reaches her, she'll just tell him to rescue Carlton. She's satisfied here, she can die at peace with herself, in more ways than one. The first half of the epilogue can be pretty much the same. John managed to successfully rescue Carlton in his drawing. You might be thinking I forgot about the last child, but worry not, I did account for that. When Carlton asks if all the missing children are safe, Clay will tell him they are. However, there was one strange case. In the wreckage of the pizzeria, they found Baby's body, and inside her stomach, the final child was asleep, safe and sound. The idea here is that Elizabeth protected the final child from the inferno in her stomach so she could do one final good deed before her demise. This would also be another way for her to indirectly get revenge on William. It will also provide her with some sense of closure. She allows this child to have another chance at life through Baby, whereas Baby prevented Elizabeth from ever being able to have one. She can have her happy ending through him. The second half of the epilogue will be from the perspective of Sammy. John and Elizabeth both said he was alive after all. It'll consist of him driving back into Hurricane for Charlie's funeral and having him reflect upon the events surrounding Freddy's and how they tore his family apart. The final scene of the book will be him visiting his own grave at the cemetery. And that's about it for my correction outline. Now, with all of this in mind, let's try to assemble all these cluttered ideas into one coherent narrative. I'll even include some mock-up quotes for the altered sections because why shouldn't I? With that being said, I present to you viewers my revised and improved edition of The Fourth Closet. It's been 6 months since the events of the Twisted Ones, and life has gone on. Charlie miraculously survived Twisted Freddy and is now official with John. She's also opted to apparently cut her schooling short, arriving at their dorm and gathering all of her belongings before abruptly leaving soon after the Freddy incident, giving Jessica the dorm to herself. While life has gone fairly normally since the advent of the Twisted Ones, Jessica can't help but shake the feeling that something isn't quite right about Charlie. Perhaps something about her manner of speech or her style of dress that feels out of place on the Charlie Jessica knew 6 months ago. But Jessica chalks this up to the event she underwent. Maybe she did just feel the need to reinvent herself and shed the scars of Freddy's, so for now, everything in Hurricane is alright. That is, until a brand new animatronic pizzeria pops up in the small town, and things start taking a turn for the weird. Recently, Jessica's been seeing Charlie around town in some strange places and up to some unusual things. First, at a gathering at Clay's house, Jessica saw Charlie poking around towards the basement. Jessica leaned back in her seat and sipped from her glass of water, observing the lively table of friends eagerly talking amongst each other, laughing, sharing anecdotes. She felt at peace seeing all of her friends together in one place, able to simply have normal, amiable conversations with one another. It seemed like they'd finally been able to shed the scars Freddy's had left with them for the past 15 years. As Jessica glanced around, though, she caught a very brief glimpse of a flowing red dress disappearing behind the kitchen's entrance. Where's Charlie going? While Charlie had carried herself with a much more confident demeanor since the incident 6 months ago, she had always been a bit socially awkward. Jessica rose from her seat, wanting to ensure her friend was okay. "I'm going to check on Charlie," she said quietly to the table, earning her an approving glance from Clay. She quickly slipped into the living room. Jessica scanned the living room, looking for Charlie's signature red dress when she noticed the open basement door, not the way it was left when they'd gone in for dinner. Jessica peered down the narrow, dimly lit corridor and made a quick jog down to the bottom. There, she saw Charlie rooting around the boxes in the basement. "Charlie?" Jessica said, suddenly louder than intended. Charlie startled before slowly wheeling around to face Jessica. "I wanted to make sure you were doing okay," she said hesitantly. "Oh, I'm just fine. I just wanted to see if Clay still had anything of my father's down here." Jessica took a step forward and placed her hand on Charlie's shoulder. Charlie furrowed her brow and stared at the dusty wooden floor beneath her. "I hope it isn't too much for you." "It's fine. I just wanted to see if there was anything that survived. There's still a lot I never knew about him." "Well, I hope you find what you're looking for. Do you want me to help you sort through all this?" Jessica offered, kneeling down and noting the various boxes. While most of it were the personal belongings of the Burkes, there were a few boxes labeled with a capital F. Artifacts from Freddy's, no doubt. "No, I'll be fine." "Alright, if you insist. Come back up soon." Then she saw her hauling a load of scrap metal from the local scrapyard. Jessica leisurely drove along the narrow stretch of road. Along this side of town there was little to no urban life, just barren desert. She rolled down her window and slowed her pace, allowing herself to breathe in the sweet spring air. Jessica poked her head out the window, peering around at her surroundings. The only sign of human habitation around here was the scrapyard that'd been here ever since she'd been born, and even that added to the desolate atmosphere. She'd never seen anyone enter or leave the lot. As far as she was concerned, it could have been abandoned. However, that idea quickly lost credibility as she pulled closer to the yard's gates. A figure was in fact emerging from it, hauling with them a box of scrap. As she got closer, Jessica started to get a more clear look at the figure. An elegant figure in a red dress with long brown hair. "Charlie?" Jessica slowed to a crawl and leaned over the window's edge. "Charlie!" Charlie looked up towards Jessica, eyes wide. Slowly, she began to make her way towards the car after pushing the flaps of the box down over its contents. "What are you doing out here?" Charlie asked. "I could ask you the same thing." Charlie glanced down at the heap of metal parts in her arms. "Just getting stuff for a project I'm working on." Jessica gave her a look of surprise. "Really? I thought you lost interest in robotics after... you know." "Well, I figured that I shouldn't let one bad experience ruin it for me." Jessica almost wanted to point out that one bad experience was quite the understatement, but she stopped herself. "Well, you raise a fair point. I hope you find some good material to work with." Then she saw Charlie going behind circus babies. Jessica strode down the sidewalk in the fading sunlight. She hoped she could make the walk back to her apartment before the night was impenetrable. "Looks like that won't be an issue," she noted as she passed the glowing pizzeria, whose neon lights flooded the surrounding area with blinding hues of pinks and reds and blues. Jessica paused to consider the pizzeria. The sign above the entrance was adorned with a tearful clown girl with bushy red pigtails and eyes too big for her face, outstretching an inviting hand to the parking lot beneath her. Beneath her in friendly-looking bubble letters were the words, "Circus Baby's Pizza World." Jessica found the striking similarities to Freddy's deeply unsettling. Her eyes descended towards the parking lot, scanning the base of the building. The lot was fairly full, about half of the space is occupied. As she absent-mindedly examined the various vehicles dotting the lot, something caught her eye in the alleys along the edge of the building. An elegant figure in a striking red dress, making her way towards the back of the building with purpose in her step. Again, Jessica realized. Charlie. What could she possibly be doing here? The scrapyard she could rationalize, but this seemed too bizarre. As Jessica pondered the possibilities, Charlie vanished behind the building. While Jessica momentarily considered pursuing her, she looked up at the dimming sky and remembered her original goal. This mystery will have to wait for another time. She picked up her pace and began making more rapid steps towards her complex. After witnessing all of this strange behavior, Jessica starts to wonder if maybe she was right about Charlie not being the same Charlie she knew 6 months ago. So she decides to go talk to John and present him with her findings. While he's initially resistant to her idea, in their conversation they stumble across a smoking gun piece of evidence that seems to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is not really her. Jessica approached John's less-than-luxury apartment door. She struck the wood with her fist, producing 3 resonant knocks. After a moment of waiting, John appeared at the door, swinging it open before a surprised expression appeared on his face. "Jessica, what are you doing here?" "There's something I wanted to talk to you about." Jessica took a hesitant step towards the smaller living room. John nodded his approval and followed her into his living room. "It's about Charlie." "What about her?" John inquired as he made his way towards his kitchenette, pulling out a chair at a small table and gesturing for her to have a seat. Jessica settled into the wooden chair that was slightly too small for her. "Have you noticed anything unusual about her lately?" Jessica felt awful saying this. What kind of a friend was she, talking about her old roommate like this? John seemed to agree with her sentiment, a look of skepticism washing over his face. "In what way?" "Well, not even lately, I guess. I feel like she's been like this since everything that happened 6 months ago." John's expression turned from skepticism to a harsh glare. "Oh god, what am I saying? She's scarred! Wouldn't you want to reinvent yourself after that?" John snapped. Jessica felt bad continuing to argue because he had a point, but she felt like she was obligated to press him further. If she was right and this wasn't really Charlie, John should be the first to know. "Yeah, but have you seen what she's been up to lately?" Jessica countered. Rifling through Henry's old stuff, getting mechanical junk from the scrapyard. I don't know, maybe she wanted to honor her father's memory or something. What do you even mean she isn't her? Who else would she be? I don't know, but there's something about her that just doesn't feel the same. Plus, I also saw her going back behind that new clown pizzeria. I thought we all agreed we wanted nothing to do with that. John opened his mouth to protest, but let it slowly close before saying anything. He shut his eyes and let out a frustrated sigh. Look, I don't know who you think that could possibly be, but I know for certain that it's my Charlie. The same face, the same short, frizzy brown hair. Wait, stop. Jessica interrupted him. Short hair? Are we talking about the same person? John raised his eyebrows in confusion. Yes? She's always had shoulder-length short hair. Are you okay? First this imposter nonsense, and now you don't even know what she looks like. Something wasn't adding up. As long as Jessica had known her, Charlie had had long brown hair down to her mid-back. Wait, hold on. Describe Charlie's face to me. John gave her a skeptical look, but nonetheless obliged. Big brown eyes, small nose and lips, lighter complexion, dimples. What about her freckles? Jessica inquired. John cocked his head, conjuring up a mental image of their friend. She doesn't have freckles. Yes, she does, Jessica shot back. Something's definitely wrong here. If this is still our Charlie, then why does she look different to both of us? John's gaze wandered toward the table. Jessica could tell that he was struggling to come up with a rebuttal. After all, freckles don't appear overnight. After her talk with John, Jessica decides to go to Clay's house to corroborate this piece of evidence. Jessica rose from her seat. I'm gonna go ask Clay how he sees Charlie. Now we both know something is afoot here. She pushed her seat and made her way to the door, and glanced at John before taking her leave. The question now is how long he'll pretend there isn't. When Jessica gets to Clay's, however, she finds the door torn to shreds and Clay lying in a pool of his own blood. In a panic, Jessica calls 911. Jessica slowed to a stop outside of Clay's house. If the way he saw Charlie was as distinct as hers and John's perceptions of her, the natural next step would be to ask Charlie herself how she thought she looked. As Jessica approached the porch, she noticed a distinct glow lighting the doorway, as if the door was open and inside light was flooding in. Jessica slowed her pace and crept towards the house with a more cautious attitude. Clay? She quietly asked nobody in particular. As Jessica slowly made her way up the porch step, her suspicion was confirmed. However, the door itself wasn't open. It lay in pieces on the floor before her, torn to smithereens as if it were a piece of paper run through a shredder. Jessica stared at the decimated piece of wood wide-eyed. Clay? She said again, this time with more urgency in her voice. She broke into a sprint and dashed down the hall to the police chief's office. There, through the door swung entirely open, she saw him. Clay lying in a pool of his own blood on the floor, an appalling gash splitting his forehead open. Jessica let out a shriek of terror, her face going white. She swiftly kneeled next to Clay, feeling his wrist for a pulse. A momentary pang of relief washed over her when she felt a vein pump. However, that feeling quickly subsided as panic once again took hold. Jessica leapt for her feet and reached for Clay's landline, practically pulling the phone off its cord as she clumsily slammed in the digits 911. While waiting for an ambulance to arrive, Jessica also discovers Ella, mumbling Shining Star Silver Reef. Before leaving, she takes the doll with her. Jessica anxiously paced around Clay's office, glancing down at the chief of police every few seconds as if he might have somehow vanished while she wasn't looking. As she impatiently waited for the ambulance to arrive, she perused Clay's shelves, looking for any signs that he saw the same things that she did, or rather, didn't see what she did. As she scanned the various bookcases that covered the walls, mostly decorated with police accolades, nothing of aid to her, Jessica was disrupted by a very faint mumbling. A distant voice sputtered. Jessica stopped in her tracks. She cocked her head, listening closely for the mumbling to happen again. Sure enough, a moment later the same voice repeated its announcement. Jessica wheeled around to face the source of the noise. It appeared to be coming from the desk. She inched towards the desk, considering that the voice might lead her to whatever was responsible for Clay's current state. Jessica leaned across the tabletop, examining her surroundings while listening again for the mumbling. Once again she heard it, albeit slightly more audible now. Under the desk. Carefully, she tiptoed to the other side of the table and peered underneath. A cardboard box similar to those in the basement. Jessica withdrew it and began sifting through the contents, more relics from Freddy's. At the bottom of the box, covered by various artifacts, was the source of the noise. A pristine plastic doll that had long since seen better days lay buried at the bottom. A blue dress adorned her body, and a frilly pale apron covered the front. In her hand she clutched a doll-sized saucer and teacup. A ruffled satin headdress sat perched atop her head. Ella. Jessica plucked the doll out of the box, waiting for her to say something again. Shining Star, Silver Reef, the doll announced through a cacophony of static. You, Jessica said, tucking the doll under her arm, are coming with me. Once the ambulance arrives, Jessica quickly follows Clay to the hospital, asking John to come so he could see what happened. The pair visit Clay in the hospital room and ask him to identify his attacker. He gives a vague description of someone who could be Charlie. However, before he can give more precise details, he fades into unconsciousness. On their way out, Jessica and John encounter a distraught mother who says that her child has gone missing. She tells them that she went to the police station and they believed that it was simply a custody debate that would resolve itself shortly. The only one who believed that there was more to the case was Clay, who is now incapacitated. Jessica promises that she will find and rescue the woman's son on Clay's behalf. When they get outside, Jessica shows John Ella. John recalls that Silver Reef is the name of a ghost town not too far out from Hurricane. The two set off for the town, hoping to find more to investigate regarding the sinister ongoings in Hurricane. When they get there, they notice a downtrodden old archway emblazoned with a rusty star. They make their way down the path beneath it to a small house at the end of the trail. When they knock on the door, they're face to face with Charlie's Aunt Jen. When they enter the house, John and Jessica press her for more information regarding Charlie, and she initially refuses to help. Jessica pleads with her more and begs her to help her niece. Aunt Jen loosens up when Jessica refers to Charlie as her niece, and after a moment of contemplation, guides her and John to the back of the house. A hint of sentiment flashed across the face of the stoic woman at the mention of the word niece. Aunt Jen slowly rose from her seat. "I want to show you something." She began to walk down a dimly lit hall at the back of the room. As they followed her, Jessica observed her surroundings. The house looked barely lived in. The walls were barren and encrusted with years' worth of dust and mildew. It seemed like its residents had moved away decades ago, long forgetting they'd ever been to the house. Aunt Jen opened the door marking the end of the hall. Jessica took an apprehensive step forward into the room, John following shortly after. Inside was a cluttered mess, stacks upon stacks of cardboard boxes littering the floor, smattered with the golden glow of the twilight sun. As the two of them spread about the room and peered into the scattered cases, Aunt Jen filed in after them. "When my brother lost his child, it seemed like it was the end of his world," Aunt Jen said. She reached into a box and withdrew a teal flannel. Henry's. The woman caressed the shirt, a wistful expression clouding her visage as she thought about her family. Little did I know how red I was. Henry couldn't bear the loss. He couldn't take it. So he coped in the only way he knew how. He surrounded himself with his machines and machinations, escaping to an impregnable utopia of technology. Jessica gave Aunt Jen a perplexed look. Was Henry really that torn up by what happened to Sammy? While it seemed like a ridiculous question, in Jessica's experience it was only last year that the incident seemed to really start affecting his daughter. Aunt Jen only gave her a sad smile in response. The death of that child was also the death of him. A series of resonant knocks sounded from the house's front, causing them all to jump. John and Jessica turned to one another, exchanging wide-eyed looks. Aunt Jen wheeled around and walked across the room to a narrow door buried in the corner of the room behind a tower of boxes. She gently moved them aside, carefully lifting the ones at the very top off by hand. She swung the door open. What I didn't realize is that it was also the death of me. Jessica looked past Aunt Jen's shoulder. Inside of the room she saw a featureless robot skeleton looming over the woman. The machine was alarmingly tall, nearly twice her height, and wielded a sharp blade in its hand. Jessica quickly realized what this creature was. It was Henry's suicide robot, the thing he built to take his own life. I suppose he died the same way he lived. Knock, 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 again. Aunt Jen continued to ignore the sound. She reached past the skeleton and began pulling something out of the closet, an ornate wooden chest which looked very well maintained in contrast to the mess covering the rest of the room. Aunt Jen dragged the chest to the edge of the room and leaned on it, staring at the wall. But today's the day I start living again. Her words were punctuated by another 3 knocks, louder than before. Aunt Jen threw the chest open and turned around to face John and Jessica, watching her with intent. Take good care of her for me. And with that, she wordlessly took her leave. Jessica cautiously stepped toward the box. She stepped over the mess on the floor and leaned forward, peering into it. When she saw its contents, her face went pale and she let out a deep gasp. John rushed after her, eager to see what was contained in the chest. When he looked for himself, he let out an astonished, "Oh my god." Inside the box was Charlie. Upon finding Charlie, John and Jessica quickly scoop her up and make a break for it out the window. The two of them take her back to John's apartment, and they discuss their options before they're cut short by the arrival of Not Charlie. While John hides real Charlie in a safe place, Jessica distracts Not Charlie. Jessica pushed open the door just wide enough for her to slip out and shut it right after. Sure enough, there was Charlie, but something was very noticeably wrong about her appearance. She looked like a sculpture someone had made of Charlie. Her skin was a sleek white plastic material, and her legs and arms were distinctly split at the joints. While her features were distinctly Charlie's, a thick seam ran down the middle of her face, dividing it in half. 2 red circles that seemed to represent blush dotted her cheeks. While she maintained her long brown hair, it was not made of individual strands, but rather one large piece of some kind of synthetic fiber material. It was Charlie, but also not. "Charlie, what are you doing here? Not that I don't want you here or anything, just wondering," Jessica sputtered in a far too enthusiastic voice. Navigating a conversation with this thing that was visibly very distinct from her Charlie would be a challenge. "I've been out walking. I wanted to clear my head. I realized I was near you and I thought I should drop by," the imposter said. "Is that okay?" "Oh, of course it is. I was just on my way out, though. I think John has a job interview or something to get to." Charlie flashed a disappointed look that seemed almost angry. But I could join you on your walk. I don't have anywhere to be. Before Charlie had a chance to reply, Jessica took off at an uncomfortable pace. Charlie quickly caught up with her and fell into step with Jessica. Now that the illusion was beginning to fade, Jessica took more notice of the woman's inhuman qualities. She articulated her joints in an unnaturally rigid way. She walked at too steady of a pace. Her expressions were too static. How didn't I notice until now? The two walked alongside each other in an awkward silence, Jessica nervously glancing at the woman occasionally. She struggled to keep up with Charlie's purposeful strides down the sidewalk. "We should all hang out or something later," Jessica suddenly blurted. She berated herself in her head. "You're forcing it too much." Charlie froze in her tracks and turned to Jessica. "That sounds good," she said. "How's the Thai place John and I went on our first date tonight? 6? "Yeah, that sounds good," Jessica said, relief washing over her. Hopefully the imposter still believed that Jessica was convinced that she was the real Charlie. "Well, I best be going. I have someone I need to meet with." Charlie made her way towards her car up the road. Her pristine skin shimmered in the sunlight. "See you tonight," she called from behind. Jessica eagerly waved as Charlie climbed into her car and vanished past the horizon, a cheery smile plastered on her face. Once the imposter was out of sight, Jessica broke into a sprint in the direction of John's apartment. Later that night, John and Jessica go to dinner with imposter Charlie. There, Charlie challenges her with evidence that indicates that Jessica knows she's not their Charlie. Jessica spars with her and outsmarts her, leading to Charlie storming off. "So, I heard you two went to that old ghost town," Charlie giggled. "What's that place called again? Silver Reef?" Jessica's eyes widened as she sipped from her water. Charlie leaned forward and gave her a smug grin from across the table as Jessica held the glass to her lips, not drinking. John gave an alarmed look back and forth between the two. "What could you two have been doing there?" Jessica racked her brain for anything that might incriminate her in turn. The image of a woman in a red dress disappearing behind a pizzeria appeared in her periphery. Jessica slowly lowered her glass. "I could ask the same for what you were doing at that clown pizzeria. What was it called? Circus Babies?" The facsimile of Charlie's smug expression melted away into one of frustration, and Jessica shot her a satisfied smile. "I don't know who or what you are, but you aren't my Charlie," John said, turning to face Charlie with a hurt expression. "How could you do that? For 6 months, you toyed with me." Charlie sneered in response. "Save it. If you really loved her that much, wouldn't you have noticed earlier?" Jessica could practically see outrage wash over John as his face began to glow red and his brows knitted themselves into a wrathful expression. He wound up his fist and threw it towards Charlie. However, her pristinely white hand caught it without missing a beat, and she pushed it down. "What kind of a way to treat your girlfriend is that?" John was too dumbstruck to respond to the imposter as she slid out of her seat. "I don't have the time for this. I have places I need to be." "Where do you think you're going?" Jessica protested, quickly getting up in pursuit of Charlie and grabbing her shoulder. She wordlessly shook the hand off with minimal effort and approached the hostess to pay the bill. Jessica backed towards their table and slowly sat down, keeping her eye on Charlie's every movement. The woman naturally stepped out of the restaurant and climbed into her car, which Jessica now realized she had stolen from the real Charlie. As she started the ignition and the vehicle's lights came to life, John and Jessica pressed themselves up to the window, watching as she disappeared down the street. "I'm gonna go follow her," said Jessica determinedly, making her way towards the door, John coming shortly behind her. She swiftly walked towards her car with purpose in her step. As she slipped into the driver's seat, she leaned out the door to speak to John. "Go back to your place and make sure Charlie is okay. Don't take an eye off her." John nodded in understanding and began jogging towards his own car. Jessica pulled the door shut and started her car, quickly taking off in the direction of the woman who was not Charlie. Jessica pursues the imposter to Circus Baby's Pizza World and goes to the back of the restaurant where she saw her before. However, she then has a run-in with imposter Charlie, who subsequently dissolves her illusion and kidnaps Jessica. Sometime later, Jessica comes to inside of Circus Baby's. There, she finds herself tied to a chair in a small room with not Charlie, who now appears as her true self, Circus Baby. Jessica asks who she is, and Baby tells her that part of her is Charlie. She recounts her death as a human, and as she reflects upon her tragic life, Jessica manages to free herself. However, when she makes a break for the door at the end of the hall, she comes face to face with none other than Springtrap. Springtrap forces Jessica into his lab, spastically dancing around and taking almost euphoric pleasure at the distant sound of a child screaming. On an operating table, Jessica sees the amalgamation of the original animatronics writhing around in what seems to be pain. Appalled, Jessica asks why Springtrap continues to do this, to which he replies that they're home with their family now. Baby then forces Jessica to help her perform surgery on Springtrap. Jessica initially tries to distract herself by thinking about something she likes, shoes, but eventually can no longer take it and runs away from them as fast as her legs can carry her. Jessica couldn't bear it anymore. The room was spinning, her vision clouded. She dazedly looked up at the animatronic girl, an impossibly wide smile stretching across her face. Sinister laughter rang out, bouncing across the walls of the nondescript room. So Jessica screamed. She screamed until her throat burned. She screamed until it drowned out the laughter. She screamed until it was all she could hear. She screamed until, for just a fleeting second, everything seemed like it was fine. Then, she ran. Jessica sprinted towards the door against the wall, throwing it open and tumbling out into a hallway. She scrambled to her feet and dashed down the corridor. Where she was going, she had no idea. Anywhere except there. The animatronic girl's cackles continued to ring out around Jessica as tears stung her face. She breathed deep and heavy breaths as she flew down the hall, not slowing for a second. She came upon a crossroads and shot down the left path, not thinking about her decision. Jessica dashed past a blur of neon circus-themed imagery decorating the walls. She reached a four-way intersection. She opted to run straight forward. Turn after turn, she wound through the identical halls of the pizzeria. She could have been there for 10 minutes or 10 days. Until... Wait, have I been here already? It had become too much. She was lost in the labyrinthine corridors. I'm going to die here, Jessica thought. She abruptly halted in her mad dash and crumbled to the ground, defeated and hopeless. Her mouth opened to let out another howl, but she couldn't summon it. Her lungs were out of breath and her throat was immensely sore. Jessica slumped onto the ground, face planting into the floor as she quickly faded into unconsciousness. Meanwhile, back with John, real Charlie's finally awake. He's also called Carlton and Marla to his house to help with the situation. Marla gets Charlie set up on the couch as John asks himself how he could have been so blind. Charlie asks where Jessica is, and John tells the group at large that she's been missing since the night before after pursuing the imposter. Carlton and Marla agree to go back and rescue Jessica while John keeps watch over Charlie. That evening, Carlton and Marla set off on their rescue mission. While John is guarding Charlie, however, an uninvited guest appears at his house. John absent-mindedly stared at Charlie's dozing figure beside him. His head felt light. He'd only gotten a few fleeting hours of sleep the night before, concerns for Charlie's safety constantly running across his mind. The events of the past couple days were all a blur to him in his exhausted state. For all he knew, he might wake up soon, this could all be a bizarre, demented nightmare. John outstretched an arm across the sleeping figure. Surely I can just rest my eyes for a few minutes. His heavy eyelids easily shut as a brief sting shot through his eyes. He had to resist the urge to allow sleep to consume him right there, but that desire easily subsided as the image of the robot woman with the shining silver skin appeared in his head. John's rest, however, was suddenly disrupted by the sound of a loud bang at his front door. His eyes shot open, and he tossed a blanket across Charlie's body quickly. He scrambled to his feet, creeping towards the door and listening intently. The banging rang out again, and John flew across the room to his kitchenette, clumsily grasping at a chair to use as a weapon. Behind him, the sound of wood being shredded enveloped the small apartment, scraping against his ears. John slowly wheeled around. In his doorway, he saw a statuesque young woman. She had elegant features and a graceful, picture-perfect body. However, she was very clearly not human. Her face was split into several compartments, and her limbs were segmented at the joints. Her skin was a shimmering white. A pair of playful ginger pigtails sprouted from the sides of her head of bright red hair. Her chest was adorned with a matching red crop top, and a fluffy skirt jutted out from her waist. The girl stood in the remains of John's door, decimated into wooden smithereens and splinters scattered across the floor. This was what Charlie really was. John let out a battle cry and flung himself at the animatronic girl, wielding the chair to strike. She easily dodged the attack, and John went tumbling to the floor, his makeshift weapon flying out of his hands and bouncing off the wall. He turned around and saw the woman approaching him. He tried to back away, but she quickly caught up and reached down. The animatronic girl tugged on John's collar and dangled him in the air before her. "Where is she?" the girl spat. "I'll let you kill me before I tell you," John shot back in a strained voice. "Then so it will be." The girl slipped her hands below John's waist. "Just like under the oak tree when we were young." The woman then pulled John to a sudden kiss. An ear-splitting ringing pierced the room, shattering John's functions. He crumpled to the floor, incapacitated by the deafening noise. "Remember, John?" Charlie's voice echoed around him as tens of hundreds of feminine silhouettes materialized in a blur around him, before instantaneously shattering into thin air. John's head pounded with an indescribable pain. He tried to pull himself up, but he found that he simply couldn't. All he could do was watch as the animatronic girl strode to the sofa and scooped up the bundle of blankets, effortlessly carrying her through the decimated doorway. John tried to reach forth a hand, but barely lifted it off the ground before immediately losing all of his remaining strength, his arm pathetically flopping onto the ground. Thousands of dazzling colors clouded his vision as he dissolved into sleep. Meanwhile, back with Jessica in the pizzeria, she's found herself in a compact metal room with a group of children, the oldest of which having to be no older than 10. She quickly realizes that one of them is the child of the mother her and John met at the hospital before, and then realizes that all of these children have been kidnapped. When she asks how they ended up here, they tell her that it was Circus Baby who captured them at the pizzeria. Jessica promises to the children that she'll rescue them, and reaches for the door to lead them out. The children warn her, though, that if she tries to open the door, it will attack them. Jessica assures them that she knows how to deal with things like this, and they have nothing to worry about. She swings the door open and is face to face with Mangle, and tries to fight it before it manages to get away. However, it then sweeps through a concerned vent and snatches the son of the concerned mother away. For now, Jessica focuses on getting the remaining kids out. Back with Carlton and Marla, they've broken their way into the pizzeria and are on the way to rescue Jessica. The two sneak through a mirror maze and make a narrow escape from Funtime Freddy before encountering Jessica. Jessica tells them what's going on and that one of the children was stolen by Mangle. Carlton recalls a vague mention by his father of abducted children, and in turn chooses to go back and save the final child to avenge his own childhood friend who was taken by William. Marla and Jessica escort the other kids out of the building. After a chaotic chase back through the maze past Mangle, they're almost out when Mangle obstructs their path. Jessica distracts it while Marla gets the kids out. She climbs into a play structure and tricks Mangle into following her, entangling it in a net before making a narrow escape. Back with Charlie, she wakes up in a dingy, dimly lit room, strapped to an operating table. She struggles to free herself before she's approached by none other than Baby. Charlie doesn't argue, but rather begs to know who, or what, either of them are, and why William wants her so badly. Baby then shares her memories with Charlie, and all is revealed. First, Baby tells us her own backstory. William was obsessed with building Circus Baby, and seldom gave his daughter Elizabeth the attention and love she needed. Elizabeth wanted so badly to be worthy of William's love, and so she snuck out in the middle of the night just to get one look at Circus Baby, what made her so perfect. However, she barely got a glance before the animatronic's stomach opened up and captured the girl, giving Elizabeth the means to be the woman her father loved so much. Elizabeth's attention then turns to revealing to Charlie the truth of her existence. The truth is that Charlie is not Charlie. She was the one who was killed as a toddler, not Sammy. Henry, unable to cope with his loss, poured all of his grief and sadness into Charlie's old doll, and reconstructed it into a robot replica of his daughter. But he couldn't stop there. His daughter would have to grow up. So he made more. 4 versions to be exact. She would be a toddler, then a child, then a teenager, and then a woman. And then she would be complete. But there was something strange about her. Henry somehow managed to get part of himself into his creations. The first Charlie was made with the grief of a mourning father. She cried all day and night. The second Charlie was made at the zenith of Henry's madness, when he was so entrenched in his lies he almost believed the illusion surrounding him. The third one was strange, created at an inflection point when Henry started to realize he had gone mad. The fourth one was made with Henry's rage. At himself, at William, at the cruelty of the world. And the fourth Charlie, imbued with Henry's rage, was none other than Elizabeth, the silver-eyed endoskeleton twitching in the darkness, activated all the time. Stolen by William, hoping to replicate what made Charlie special, the fourth one captured Elizabeth before Henry stole her right back and banished her to the fourth closet, confined and sentient for years until Charlie finally freed her into Twisted Ones. Charlie is abruptly pulled from the memory realm and finds herself freed from her binding and screaming pained, muted screams, her throat raw from howling. Charlie watched as the world melted away around her, the void dissolving as she felt her being manifest back into the nondescript, dimly lit room. She heard a muted pain scream sound around her. The shrill noise rang out until she realized she was the one screaming. As she settled back into her own body, she felt her limbs move of their own accord, freeing from their binds. "You're not Charlie. You didn't even have the soul of Charlie," a blonde-haired young woman spat at her. She sported a magenta sweater and a frilly blue skirt. "You're the pathetic ghost of a man's grief that fell unceremoniously into a cheap rag doll. And if I had to guess," Elizabeth said, feeling a hand towards Charlie's stomach, "it's right here." She easily tore through Charlie's skin. Charlie felt as though she should have screamed, but she felt nothing as Elizabeth rooted around her insides. Elizabeth ripped her arm back out of the cavity in Charlie's torso, extracting a flimsy rag doll. She had a mop of brunette yarn for hair and a haphazardly stitched-on dress of blue fabric. Ella. Charlie's mouth was agape. She wanted nothing more than to rip into Elizabeth, to scream at her, to cry, to do anything. But she couldn't. All she could do was pathetically roll to the floor, desperately clutching Ella. Meanwhile, Carlton is making his way deeper into the pizzeria. He has an encounter with Funtime Freddy and manages to escape him by hitting him with an indoor carousel. As he ventures further, however, he becomes lost and exhausted by the deep corridors of the restaurant, and slowly falls asleep, believing he failed to save the child. When Carlton wakes up, he finds himself next to a door in a long hallway and enters. Inside, he finds the final child cowering in the corner of the room. When Carlton approaches him, he tells him to save him too, putting an amalgamated mass on the table, the original animatronics. Springtrap then emerges from the shadows, wielding a syringe of remnant and manically dancing around, ecstatic to have a life test subject. He reached forwards to stab the child with the needle, but Carlton intercepts it, seemingly ending Carlton's life as a searing pain shoots through him. Back with Charlie, she makes an attempt to escape before being caught off guard. "Are you still listening to me, Charlie?" Elizabeth's voice called out as Charlie stumbled through the void. "I was a real little girl, deserving of the love and attention showered over you." Charlie dragged herself forward. She saw a small door down a hall at the end of the room. She made this door her purpose, wanting to do something, anything. Clutching Ella to her chest, she slowly made her way to the narrow corridor, Elizabeth's patient footsteps following shortly behind. When Charlie reached the door, she reached a hand up to grasp the doorknob, but couldn't find the strength in herself to pull herself all the way up. Elizabeth gingerly stepped over her body and politely opened the door. Inside, Charlie saw Carlton? Lying in a heap on the floor, unmoving, Charlie saw her childhood friend, looking almost peaceful in his still position. Above him she saw a rotten green figure, a pair of floppy ears protruding from its head. The figure laughed hysterically over the body of Carlton, spastically vibrating and twitching. Elizabeth slammed the door. "Let's not keep Father waiting now," Elizabeth sneered. "What are you doing to him? Why? What's the point of all this?" Charlie screamed, mustering the strength to pull herself to a standing position. "Why do you hate me so much?" Elizabeth calmly gazed at Charlie, a silver shimmer briefly flashing across her eyes. You want to know why I hate? I hate because, no matter what, I will never be enough. I will never amount to you. My father abandoned me. Henry abandoned me. Because I will never be their Charlie. Elizabeth whirled around and stomped forward. You got to have a life. You got to have friends. You had a father that loved you. You could go to school, drive a car, have someone who loves you. Charlie's expression softened. She took a cautious step towards the girl's backside. Elizabeth. Elizabeth whipped back around, her face glowing with rage and resentment. Why? Why wasn't I allowed to have that life? Why can't I be you? Charlie and Elizabeth simply stood staring at each other, her fury practically tangible. Charlie broke the silence. Maybe you're right, Elizabeth. Maybe I'm not supposed to be here. Neither of us are. But that doesn't mean we can't do anything. There's ultimately one man responsible for this all, William Afton. Elizabeth rolled her eyes at Charlie. She pushed past her and strode towards the door. Charlie limped after her. Elizabeth, stop! Elizabeth paused in her tracks. I don't care for this naivete. My father gave me a home when yours abandoned me while he played with his own Charlie. What has Afton done to be deserving of your love? Charlie shot back. You sacrificed everything for his respect, and what do you have to show for it? Elizabeth considered Charlie's words. They were certainly scathing, but she had a point. What had her father done to earn her admiration? A memory flashed across her mind, approaching herself at stomach level, admiring the craftsmanship before being swiftly and suddenly consumed by darkness, as the elegant figure's torso revealed a gaping void to her. Elizabeth let out a sigh. Perhaps you were right. I hate to say so, but if we want to end this cycle for good, William will have to pay. Now. A smile stretched across Charlie's face. Let's end this here, once and for all. Elizabeth placed a hand on the doorknob. Prepare yourself. We both know he won't go down easily. Charlie scanned the room, looking for something to use as a weapon. The only things of note were the operating table, a wooden chair in the corner, and a vintage-looking furnace pressed against the wall and jutting up the ceiling. She scrambled for the chair and held it above her head, poising herself to attack. Elizabeth pushed open the door. I have her. Charlie heard her gleeful scream ring out as a molding, tattered rabbit suit dashed in a primal way down the hall, seemingly blind to a combat-ready Charlie barely hidden behind the corner. As Springtrap flew into the room, she wound up her weapon and charged at him from the back, landing a solid strike on the back of his head that sent him into a heap on the floor. Charlie gazed upon the mass of mechanical parts and faded yellow fabric before her, admiring her handiwork. However, she barely attempted to collect herself before the thing scrambled to its feet again, snarling and hissing, seemingly unfazed by the blow. Charlie whirled around, looking for her weapon, but couldn't find it. She prepared for a hand-to-hand engagement with Springtrap despite knowing that her odds were slim, when suddenly an attack from the side launched him across the room. Elizabeth followed up with a satisfying punch to the face and a devastating kick square in the chest, grounding Springtrap and leaving him writhing on the floor like a beetle flipped on its backside. Elizabeth stamped on Afton's chest, eliciting a twitch of pain. She leaned down to eye level with her father, giving him a death glare. How could I ever admire you, you pathetic bug? She firmly gripped the rabbit's foot, effortlessly dragging him across the floor. Elizabeth, he croaked in a weary voice. Charlie's eyes followed Elizabeth to her destination, the large furnace at the edge of the room. She quickly caught up and swung the furnace door open as Elizabeth approached the blazing abyss, Springtrap mumbling her name behind her. Elizabeth hoisted the carcass forth, as if offering it to the flames. Goodbye, father, Elizabeth said to the writhing figure in her arms, attempting to free itself from her unwavering grip. And with that, William Afton was consumed in a whoosh of infernal heat, Charlie slamming the door shortly after him. The two women nervously looked between each other in the furnace. While it would seem impossible to survive this, that had never stopped Afton. Moments later, a muffled scream rattled the structure, and a pair of charred black things remotely resembling hands grasped the bars with a steel grip. In a show of inhuman strength, the door flew straight off its hinges, and the ashen figure of Springtrap engulfed in brilliant flames re-emerged for the final time. Charlie darted across the room as Elizabeth lunged over, reaching for the battered wooden chair. Springtrap blindly flew around the room, leaving a trail of smoke and fire in his wake. Elizabeth stood waiting for a chance to land a direct strike before a blur of scarlet and black zipped past her. She clumsily swung her weapon at it. However, it went down easily, letting out a scream as it slammed to the ground. Elizabeth! Silence! Elizabeth barked, delivering another attack with her weapon. Her formerly calculated and calm appearance swiftly dissolved as her assault became more and more vicious and unhinged. Years of resentment seethed from every strike, practically burying the chair's back into the man she had for so long called her father. Elizabeth lifted the chair over her head, winding up her one final blow. With all of her might, she hurled the busted, charred piece of wood down onto the remains of Afton's esophagus, bluntly severing his head from its body. The chair shattered into flaming pieces. Charlie and Elizabeth watched as sparks crept along the dusty, dry floor, the flickers dancing towards the wall. The flames met the room's facade, and before they knew it, a curtain of fire descended before them. In the spirit world, Carlton convinces the children that William is not their friend. They watch as the spirits of Elizabeth and Charlie drag his spiritual representation away, allowing the children to finally be liberated. This is the bad man. This is the bad man. Carlton pointed from the drawing to William Afton and back again. He's the bad man who hurt you, and right now he's about to hurt someone else, Carlton pleaded. The children looked up at their friend, squinting at the golden rabbit. Suddenly, two figures emerged from the misty borders of the realm. Two little girls, heads of blonde and brown hair respectively with cherubic faces. They grasped onto each of Afton's arms, effortlessly pulling him into the ethereal fog. Afton struggled with a primal passion, writhing and spasming, but the girls carried him into the ether without so much as a struggle. The illusion faded as the rabbit soup began to decay into tatters and the heavenly glow dissolved into a sickening black, the distant dance of flames visible through the smog. Back at John's apartment, John wakes up after Elizabeth's attack, finding his door annihilated and swiftly pursuing her to circus babies. John's head rattled with splintering pain, a sky of blinking stars scattering across his line of vision. The void dissipated around him, reality taking shape and the speckled starlight fading into black. A blindingly bright glow shot into his field of vision, shining down upon him. The shape of a doorway took shape around it, and a floor laid itself out. Individual objects became clear, and John made out shreds of wood coating his floor. Suddenly, his memory struck him like an oncoming vehicle. The red-haired woman. Where had he seen her before? He scoured his memories for where the woman had appeared to him before when he realized. The pizzeria. Circus Baby's Pizza World. She was there, where Jessica had followed the imposter. A burst of vitality shot through John, and he quickly balanced himself to his feet, ignoring the wide-open doorway and flying across the parking lot to his car. At the pizzeria, Charlie offers Elizabeth the chance to escape all she can and be able to live the life that she was never given the chance to. However, having attained revenge on her father, she's content to burn with the restaurant and let this all fade to ashes. Charlie beamed at Elizabeth. If you still want the chance to have a life, then now's the time, but I'm staying here. Elizabeth shook her head. I'm staying with you. All of this has to end here today. That includes us. Meanwhile, John is trying to get into the pizzeria to rescue Charlie. He follows a trail left by Carlton and, as he sprints deeper into the pizzeria, begins to feel the signs of the growing inferno. First, it feels unusually hot. Then he sees smoke before finally meeting with the rapidly spreading blaze. He follows the fire to its source and finds Charlie. John came upon a long corridor, obscured by layers of swirling orange mist and suffocating smoke. While he had the urge to run all the way to the end, John realized he was short of breath and his lungs filled with oxygen, so he made a swiftly paced walk across instead. Through the smog, John suddenly noticed a silhouette, that of a young woman, obscured in the flames. A second one appeared shortly behind. The first one took a step forward, and a pair of black leather combat boots emerged from the fiery void, attached to a pair of jeans coated in a thick layer of soot and cinder. "Charlie!" John cried hoarsely, running forward before being halted by a slab of crumpled material. Charlie's face took shape in the light of the fire, as John realized he was looking through a doorway. Charlie outstretched her arms and invited John to an embrace. He leaned forward and wrapped his arms around her in turn. "I promised I'd never take my eyes off you again," he wept. "I can never forgive myself. John, please, I promise you it's okay," Charlie said consolingly. "After experiencing this place, I almost feel like it was destiny for me to come here." "No, this isn't destiny," John shouted tearfully. "Come with me, please. We can move on and forget that this all happened." Charlie solemnly shook her head. "That won't happen. As long as I'm around, the memories of Freddy's will haunt you guys forever." She gave John a determined look. "Tonight, all of this will finally end, and all of you will be free of this curse." Charlie reached down and pulled something up. In her arms, John saw the lifeless, ghastly figure of Carlton, his face smeared with grease and ash. She shoved him towards John, and he swiftly scooped up his friend. "Afton's gone. Save Carlton. I love all of you so very dearly. Please tell them that." "Charlie, please!" John desperately screamed, but Charlie just smiled sadly. "Goodbye, John. I love you so much." "No!" John howled, leaning past the body in his arms to reach her, but was interrupted when a pair of sleek, metallic hands pulled Charlie backward into the abyss, shortly before a massive chunk of ceiling slammed into the ground where she stood, rumbling the earth before John's feet. This brings us to the epilogue. John managed to save Carlton, and all the kids were safely delivered to their parents. However, there was one strange case. "Are the kids alright?" Carlton asked, not sure if he wanted to hear the answer. "They're safe. All of them," Jessica said quickly with a smile. "All of them." "But there was one strange case," Clay interjected. The room's attention turned to him, an atmosphere of concern washing over them. "In the remains of the pizzeria, we found that girl. The imposter. She didn't make it out, but inside of her stomach, the last child was there, safe and sound." A look of collective surprise appeared across the hospital room's members, taken aback by the idea that the wicked woman who had replaced their dear friend would protect one of her own victims. Clay shrugged. "It's certainly an anomaly, but what's important is that the kid is safe. That much we can be happy for." After this, we cut to a new perspective, that of Sammy, Charlie's surviving twin brother. He comes to Hurricane for Charlie's funeral, reflecting upon the events that unfolded and how they tore apart his family. "Welcome to Hurricane, Utah." Sam gave the sign a look of stolid neutrality. As he passed the sign, he suddenly felt miles away from home. It'd been 15 years since he'd last been here. His memories of the town were fleeting. All he could remember were his father's unrelenting grief and his mother sweeping him away in a flurry of rage. He hadn't recognized anything, but he also didn't expect to. Sam had a very vague understanding of the events surrounding his sister's recent death. However, he did very vividly remember her passing so long ago as well. The yellow rabbit reaching a giant hand towards his sister, plucking her up and watching as she vanished into the ether. He had long been racked by this memory, haunted by the impossible prospect of Charlotte dying again, and then again. Sam and his mother had barely ever heard from his family in Utah, or at least he didn't himself. His mother was, for the most part, caring and warm. However, sometimes she would emerge from a trip to the mailbox or call on the telephone sobbing, lamenting her husband and daughter. Sam was left to simply watch as she wept and wept, the only meaningful memory of his family being Charlie snatching before his very eyes. Before visiting Charlie's friends, Sammy stops at the graveyard to make a special visit. Sam tapped a nervous hand on the ornate metal gate, considering the scene of tranquility before him. The atmosphere of the cemetery was oddly serene as he ambled down the gravel path, glancing at the tombs dotting out of the ground around him. He slowly shuffled to the end of the path, as the pathway dissolved into soil and unkempt turf. Sam reached the end of the path and approached two graves jutting out of the earth. Sam gave an unimpressed smirk as his eyes peered from left to right. The first grave was Henry's, his father's. The second one read, "Beloved son, Samuel Emily, 1980 to 1983. And with that, we've finally done it! I'm finally done with my excruciatingly thorough criticism, revision, and rewrite of The Fourth Closet. As I previously mentioned, the one major thing I have with The Fourth Closet is all the wasted potential. I can look past all the plot holes and inconsistencies, but the amount of untapped potential frustrates me beyond all belief. Obviously, my rewrite did not address or resolve any of my complaints. In fact, I think that some of my writing was a little cheesy, if anything. But just having something at all, I feel, would make them much less glaring. So, what did you think of my revised draft? Did you agree with my criticisms? How would you fix the book? Please tell me your thoughts in the comments, because I'm really interested to know what the other 4 people in the world who have read this book all the way through and feel as strongly about it as I do think. Anyway, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you watched all the way up until now, I am so incredibly grateful. If you did enjoy it and want to see more content like it, please, I beg of you, leave a like or comment or even subscribe, because I poured my entire being into fixing this godforsaken book. I don't think any normal person should get this worked up over a Five Nights at Freddy's novel, and if you made it this far, you clearly support that, and I'm glad someone does. But with that all being said, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!
Done explaining. This is because